Hey guys, it's Courtney and I am back with card number 3 using the Festive Poinsettias stamp set by Altenew. And I am starting off here with a piece of Neenah Solar White 80-pound cardstock, and I'll be stamping my image with ink on 3 blackout ink, which I think has become my new favorite ink for doing my favorite thing, which is Copic Coloring. So I'm going to go ahead and stamp this down towards the bottom of my card panel, and I'll also take a piece of Simon Says Stamp masking paper and stamp that out as well. This is probably the best masking paper in my opinion for doing any kind of ink blending. It's super tacky, so you can use Eclipse masking paper. There's other masking paper out there, but I just find that if you're doing any kind of ink blending over your image, this is the best one to use. It pretty much stays in place no matter what. So I did go ahead and fussy cut out my image, and I'm not being too particular here. I'm not cutting this perfectly. I just want the basic outline of the image, and I'm not even worrying about the center there between the stems. Next, I'm taking antique linen, and this is regular distress ink, and I'm going over with a very light hand and covering up my entire panel, including right directly over my image. I haven't masked this yet because this is such a light color and it's regular distress ink and not oxides. I can certainly color right over it. I'm going to be coloring with pretty vibrant colors anyway, so you're not even going to notice. Next, I took that masking paper and I just put this on my arm sometimes and peel it up to remove some of the tackiness if it's a little bit too tacky and I'm too worried about it tearing my paper. I had a little bit of trouble lining this up. I should have cut this down into more than one mask, but it is what it is. I was able to line it up the best I could, and we'll move on to adding the rest of the background here. Now I'm using the Classy Stripes stencil, also by Altenew, and I just lined that up onto my card panel here. I wasn't sure if I wanted to do diagonal lines, but obviously you can see there it doesn't fit. So I decided to do vertical lines, and I'm also going to be adding some texture paste here, or some embossing paste, in this case glimmer paste. So I'm using my washi tape here to adhere the stencil down to the back of the panel. That way the tape doesn't get in the way when you're doing the rest of your background. Next, I took regular distress ink here, and this is Vintage Photo, and I'm just adding a little bit of color to kind of differentiate between those stripes. I'm not pressing very hard because I don't want this to be overly dark, and I'm kind of going in the direction of the stencil. I'm not doing circle motions like I normally would. And once I had that down, I kept my mask in place. Some of those areas you can kind of see my ink is sticking to the stencil. That's only because I've used Tombow Mono multi-glue on this before, and I must have had a little bit of residue. It doesn't show up on the card. Next, I took that glimmer paste, and you just want to make sure this is stirred up before you apply it to your card. And I just spread that all over my card panel. I went around the flower the best I could, but this is why I masked it, just because I knew that I wasn't going to be able to get right next to it with my little palette knife there. Once I had all of that down and I was pretty happy with the coverage, I removed my stencil and cleaned that off immediately because this will dry pretty quick. But I did let this sit overnight. It would probably dry in about an hour or so, but I just wanted to make sure that it was completely dry before I removed my mask. So the next day, once everything was completely dry, I did remove my washi tape there from the back. You can kind of see that some of that glimmer paste dried a little bit off the panel. Once it is completely dry, you can just go in with your scissors and snip that off. And I did remove the masking paper. Now, this was a struggle. It took me quite a while because I was trying to kind of hold down those little areas of my glimmer paste from coming up along with the mask. So you just have to be very careful when you do this. I'm not going to show you this whole thing, but you can see how slow I'm moving, and I have this sped up. So once that was finally removed, we'll move on to the Copic coloring once I snip these little extra pieces off here. And I'm going to be coloring these pretty traditional as far as traditional colors of a poinsettia. So I'm going to start with my reds, and I'm starting with my lightest color, which is the R43, and I'm just laying out my darkest areas first to saturate that paper and make my blending a little bit easier, and also kind of just mapping everything out there. That way if I make a mistake, it's only my lightest color and it's easily fixable. Next, I'll move on to my darkest color and add just my very darkest areas. Next, I'll move on to that R46, blend that out a little bit, then to my R35, and then back in with my R43 to cover up that entire petal. Now I'll just show you a couple of these leaves. I'm not going to show you all of them, but I'll kind of show you the ones with different shapes, I guess, just to show you my shading. So for this one, it kind of looks like the petal or the leaf is kind of curved. So I'm adding a little bit of shading to both ends. So for the base of the leaf as well as the little tip there, with all of my color combination, or the whole color combination, I should say. Sometimes I don't necessarily add my darkest color everywhere, but I did just add a little bit to the tip there. Blending that out with my 2 midtones, and then again back with my R43 and covering up that entire area. And this will just help give that illusion that this is kind of bent down or curved down. Now for the next leaf, this one is kind of, to me, it looks like it's kind of folded a little bit in the center. So I'm going to concentrate my very darkest areas being right there in the center. I'm not blending that darker color out all the way to the edges. And again, just going in with my lightest, then my darkest, then my 2 midtones, and then finally back to my lightest color. Now, once I had all of the coloring done of my red leaves, I wasn't getting the contrast that I was looking for, even though my darker color is super dark. So I go in with a W5. This is a warm gray marker, and I'm just darkening up those darkest areas of each of these leaves. And then I'll go back in to just some of them that you could kind of see the flick marks from that W5. And I just went in with my R46, that lighter color, just to kind of blend that out a little bit. I didn't have to do this with all of the leaves. And just going over it very quickly will allow you to blend that out. And I was much more happy with that contrast that I was getting. So I decided to do the same thing with the regular green leaves here. So I'm only using 3 greens here because I knew I was going to go in with that warm gray marker, starting off with my lightest color, going to my darkest, then my just that 1 midtone there, and then back to my lightest. And then I did take that W5 and just darkened up that shadow area, or the darkest area right there in the center of the leaf. And I'll show you one more leaf here. I'll show you this one below it. You'll see that I'm adding my lightest color, mapping out my darkest area, and I'm creating a shadow where this leaf is laying underneath this other one. And once I go in with my lightest color and then to that W5, I'll just darken up that shadow just to give that illusion that that leaf is laying over this one. Once all of my leaves were colored, I went ahead and colored my stem. Now, like I said in the other videos, these are really tiny areas, especially here on the top, so I'm not really worried about doing too much shading here. Where my mask kind of, it didn't really tear the paper, but it kind of took the top part of the paper, the smooth part of the paper that helps these Copics blend so well. So I had a little bit of bleeding, and the paper was rough. It's not that smooth cardstock anymore. So there were a couple of areas I couldn't go in with my white gel pen because I put that antique linen distress ink. So I am carefully going over these areas with my colorless blender. It is not perfect because it's very hard to take red up, but I really didn't have any option here. So some of the areas you may be able to see where it bled through a little bit, but I'm okay with that. It is what it is. To help blend out some of those areas, I went into the center of the flower where we had that really light color of the antique linen, and I'm just using my E50, which is a super light color. Not only will this add a little bit of more color to the inside, but it will help blend some of those areas out that did bleed through. Because this is such a light color, I think of it as having more qualities of the colorless blender. So anytime you use a lighter color over a darker color, it will blend that out or take away some of that color. So once all of my coloring was done, I took a piece of, and I don't know what color this is, I don't know what brand this is or anything, but it was from my scrap stash and it matched the flowers the best I found. So I'm going to be stamping my sentiment with Versamark ink, and I'm just stamping these 3 individual words that come in the stamp set, just spacing these out so that I have room to trim these down into strips. And I use my anti-static tool ahead of time. Next, I will sprinkle this with white embossing powder and heat set that. Once that was all cut down, I kind of played around with the placement on these for quite a while. I couldn't decide how I wanted these to be placed. I knew I wanted all 3 words, but as you can see, some of the words are a little bit smaller than the others. Some of them are a little bit larger font. Some of them are longer. So I really wasn't sure how I wanted to do this at first. So I just played around a lot. And once I was happy with my placement, I popped these up with foam tape. You'll see that I put the foam tape on here ahead of time, but I didn't press down hard until I was happy with the placement. Once I finally got that all down and I was happy with that, I did adhere this onto an A2 size card base, and that is it for this one, guys. Thanks a lot for stopping by and have a great day. Bye.